a basic landscape material. It is not going to be the best looking material we're ever going to make, but it will be nice and simple and allow us to start painting on our landscape. Generally, you're going to have a much more complex material network than what we're going to create today, but that can take several hours and is much more in depth. And for many of you who are only breaking into Unreal just now, it's going to be a hugely unnecessary step at this point. It will be easier to get familiar with the basic tools and things like the material editor, and then move on to some of the more advanced materials. When I was teaching, I had a really bad habit of starting with some of the more complex, more awesome looking things first, mostly because they looked awesome and it was a lot easier to keep my students' interest. However, they got lost a lot easier and couldn't remember some of the steps. So we're going to start with the basics. Like I said, this isn't going to look very good. We're going to see a lot of what's called thumbprinting, which is the repetition of a texture across the surface. And based on the way we're setting this material up, that's going to be unavoidable, but it's just the way it is. For your own personal work at home, for getting your portfolio ready, unless you're a really good technical artist and you're setting up materials and doing a lot of the more technical side of the design process, this is probably going to be a big hole in most people's knowledge. And I wouldn't say that you need to be an expert at material creation, especially if you want to be a level designer, but it certainly doesn't hurt. And I've always preferred being a one-man army of content creation, which means that you don't really have time to get good at everything, but you can definitely create a lot of neat content on your own. So we're going to go ahead and get started. One of the things this is going to do is get us familiar with the material editor. And so I've already started by creating a material. And in order to do that, you can, in your content browser, you can right click in here, and from the contextual menu, we've got material. But before we do that, um, I'm going to set this up a little bit better. So I'm going to go over to landscape resources, and I've got some layer info objects here that I've set up for this demo. We're going to delete these. And we're going to start new. So I'm going to create a folder in here called material or landscape material. And in here, I'm going to open this up. I'm going to right click and I'm going to select material. And we will call this M underscore landscape demo. That ought to be good. So now we have this basic material, but we need to get it set up. So in order to do that, I'm going to double click on this, and this will open up our material editor. And whenever you open the material editor, you're always going to see the same thing. You're just going to see this one lonely node here with all of these inputs. So we might as well get started. And the easiest way to isolate what you need, these are all the different nodes you can use in the material editor. And as you can see, there's just an absurd number of them because this is an insanely powerful tool. The material editor in Unreal is capable of some just incredible materials. You can make some truly next gen materials in here. And one of the really nice things about it is the search box here. So we're just going to type land in here and isolate just the landscape material stuff. So I'm going to start with a landscape layer coordinate. And if you're familiar with the Unreal Engine, you've probably used a texture coordinate before. This is very similar. It's got a lot of the same features. We've got our mapping scale, rotation, and whether or not we want it to pan. Most of those things we're not going to use in here. So the next thing we're going to need to do is actually get the texture samples in here that we want. So a landscape material is different from other materials in that most materials you create, you compile them, you apply them to a mesh, and that's it, you're done. There's nothing left to do here. A landscape material is essentially like setting up a painter's palette. It will allow you to paint all over your landscape and blend the different blend your different textures together for a greater effect. So I didn't import any of my own textures in this. We're just going to use ones that are already in Engine so that you guys can follow along. So if I go to my content browser and I go to starter content and textures, I'm going to grab a few things that I think would work for here. So we need something for rock, we need something for grass, and probably something for dirt. And we'll call that good for now. So let's grab our grass first. So if you highlight it in the content browser by clicking on it, we can go over to our material editor, and I've just docked it up here on this tab. It's generally floating free, but one of the nice things about Unreal is everything can be docked. And so now if I hold T on my keyboard and click in here, it will bring that texture sample in for me. So the next thing, I'm going to grab some kind of rock. Let's see, we got basalt, and this is actually pretty cool looking. Um, we'll use that because it's got a normal map for it, and we're going to want that too. So I'm going to grab the T underscore rock underscore basalt D. Come in here, I'll hold down T and click and bring that in. And then we're going to need something for dirt. We've got this ground gravel here. That would probably work since a lot of these other ones look a little too man-made. So we'll grab the T ground gravel. Come in here, hold down T, click, add this one. If you've used Unreal 3 before and you haven't used Unreal 4, one of the things you're going to find that's really nice is the grid in the material editor in Unreal 4. Everything snaps to it. It's a really nice effect. Um, you know what? Why don't we go ahead and do snow for the top two, maybe. Now we'll hold off on that. We're just going to use some basic things for now, and we can come back to that later. So a few other things we're going to need. We're going to need to bring in the normal maps the way that we brought these in, but I also am going to want to use a constant to make sure that our metallic value stays at 0, and we'll probably use some kind of parameter so that we can adjust roughness if necessary. So I'm going to hold down 1 on my keyboard and left click, and it will give me this little, it's called a parameter or a constant, material constant. So I'm going to hook this up into metallic, and I'm going to leave this set at 0. I'm just going to put this someplace out of the way for now. What this will mean is there will be no reflectivity in any of these material, or this material won't have any reflectivity to it. It'll make it not metallic at all. These new PBR materials are designed based on the way that light interacts with a surface, and I believe that metal is like their default value for that. So if you want something to not look metallic at all, you could not hook anything up to the metallic slot, and sometimes that'll do it, but if you want to ensure that it doesn't, you can just use a constant, plug that into the metallic, and leave it at 0. So the next one, we're going to need a parameter for roughness, and so for this we're going to use a scalar parameter, and the easiest way to get one of those is hold down S on your keyboard and then left click, and now we've got this thing here that says none in param 0. So we can select the little pin here and plug this into our roughness. I close that down so this will be a little bit smaller and more condensed. I'm going to click back on here, and we're going to give this a name. So under parameter name here, I'm just going to go ahead and call this roughness. And then I'm going to give it a default value of 0.5. So now that we've got those, let's go ahead and grab our normal map. So we had our grass, our rock, and our gravel here. So T ground grass underscore N, there's our normal map for that. Come down here. We're going to put these together in the same order because we're going to need to chain these together in a minute, and to make sure that the correct texture map lines up with the correct normal map. It's always helpful to just kind of bring these in the same order for both normal and your regular textures. So now we just need the gravel. Where was that? Here we go. T ground gravel N. If you're curious about the names on these, because these do look a little funky, this is a pretty standard naming convention. The T stands for texture, and then the underscore name of texture, underscore what type it is. So D has been used for diffuse, which is now called albedo, which is a little bit different than what diffuse was, but for all intents and purposes, you could still call it underscore D. Underscore N is normal, underscore M is metallic. Um, so just keep that in mind when you're naming your own, when you're saving out your own stuff from Photoshop. If you keep with this naming convention, it's going to make things easier to find. They're going to get organized better and more easily. And in some cases, based on the way the code's written, engines might need to call things specifically by their name. So if you ever want to piss off your art director super fast, screw up your naming convention, or screw up their naming convention rather. Okay, so now we've got our basic setup here. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to give myself a little bit more room to work with. Let's grab these guys, scoot these back. So we need to hook up our landscape coordinate node, and we're going to hook that up to the UVs, the little UV pin on each one of these texture samples. Ideally, we could use a couple of different landscape coordinate nodes to be able to have these tile different amounts and whatnot. That tends to be relatively inefficient. There's other ways that we can do like some macro and micro blending in between these, and we'll talk about that in a later video. For right now, we're going to stick with this very kind of basic way of doing this. So the next thing we need to do is we need to actually get our landscape layer blend together. This is very similar to Unreal 3's landscape layer blend. There's going to be a few caveats here, but we'll get to that in a minute. First things first is with this selected, right now we have no layers, there's no elements. Notice that there's no inputs on this side, there's just a single output. We need to create all the different elements that are going to go in here. And in this case, we have three different textures. We've got our grass, we've got our rock, and we've got our what's going to pass for dirt. So I'm going to hit the first one. I'm just going to name these in the order that I have them here. So we're going to call this first one grass. We're going to get rid of that none. I'm kind of surprised I didn't highlight that automatically. So we'll call this grass. And then we're going to add another one. And we will call this one rock. And then we'll add one more. And we'll call this dirt. So the grass, we're going to set to, up here where it says blend type, we have a couple of different ones here. For the grass, we're going to set it to alpha blend. And then for the rock and the dirt, we're actually going to set these to height blend. So notice now we've got a couple of things going on here. We've got our layer grass, layer rock, but then we've got height rock and height dirt. So for the layer grass, we can just take the pin from its diffuse slot and plug it directly in here. For the rock, we're going to take its diffuse and we're going to plug it into layer rock, but then we're going to take its alpha channel and we're going to plug that into the height. And then we're going to do the same thing for what we're using for dirt. So now we need to hook up our normals also. I'm going to take this and plug it into base color. And now actually, none of these have a preview weight. So over here, I should probably explain what we have over here under each of these. And I'll just close these up so there's less going on. We've got our layer name, which that one's pretty obvious. Blend types are something kind of new. The different kinds of blend types, weight blend supposedly, actually, let's set that first one to weight blend and not to alpha blend. And we'll give it a preview weight of 1. So preview weight is just the how much of it will appear here, and the values with the height blend are from, or with these blends are from 0 to 1. 0 being nothing, and 1 being fully visible, full opacity. So, uh, oops, sorry, I had a brain fart for a minute. I'm trying to do too many things at once. So, let's finish getting this hooked up, and then we'll talk about what all these different things do. Um, I'm going to grab my layer blend that I have here, and I'm going to duplicate it by hitting Control C, Control V. I'll bring this over here. And this one's going to work kind of similar, except for when we're hooking up the height part, we're not going to take that from the alpha of the normal map. We're going to take that from the alpha of the original texture. So I'm going to plug in all of my normals to their appropriate slots. So layer grass, layer rock, and layer dirt. And then I'm going to take the alpha from the rock and plug it into height rock, and take the alpha from the dirt and plug it into height dirt. And then I can take this and plug it into normal. So now we actually are starting to get, we have our material, not starting to get one. Move these guys out of the way. So now I'm going to hit apply, and apply will compile the material and or save any changes that I made. Hit save. And now if we go back to our screen here, I'm going to go to my modes panel in place, and I'm going to select my landscape so that it shows up in my details panel. And over here we've got landscape material, and it says none. So I'm going to go to my starter content, and I made a landscape resources folder and a landscape material. So I'm going to select my landscape demo material from here, and then I'm going to hit this little arrow here, use selected asset from content browser. So we'll give this a minute. It's going to bring this in, and it will probably flood the entire landscape with the default grass value that we gave the preview weight of 1. Just give this another minute while it's compiling the shaders. There we go. So you can see the thumbprinting I was talking about. We've got this, up close it looks all right, but off in a distance, that looks pretty bad. There's a couple of things we can do in our material to fix that right now. If we go into our landscape coordinates, we can actually adjust the mapping scale. You don't want to go too high on this. It's similar to scaling an object up that's already got a material on it. Your material is going to start to get muddy and gross looking. But we're going to start with like a value of, I don't know, 5 ought to be good. So we'll give that a minute, and here in the preview it's going to look terrible, which means it might look terrible up close and personal to it, but we'll find out once we get back to our map. Okay, cool. It's done compiling. Let's come over here. It doesn't look too bad. We've still got a lot of thumbprinting, but it's a little less awful. So now, in order to actually paint on this, we're not ready to paint yet. There's one little gotcha. So over here where it says grass, rock, and dirt, you click on the landscape tab in the modes panel and go to paint. If I try and paint anywhere on here, I'm going to get this message that this layer has no layer info assigned yet. This is a new thing to Unreal 4. This didn't exist before. And in order to take care of that, so you have your layer over here under target layers where it says grass. If I click this little arrow here, create layer info, it's going to give me 2 options, weight blended layer normal or non-weight blended layer. For the purpose of this demo, just select weight blended layer normal, and then it's going to ask you where you want to create it at. So I've actually created a folder for this already. The landscape resources folder. So I'm just going to hit OK and create it in that folder. And I'm going to do the same thing for rock. And then I'm going to do it one more time for the dirt. And now we're actually ready to start painting. So at this point, we can take any of these materials we have here or any of these textures and we can begin painting them on. So I can take rock, um, and there's a good chance that when you start this, it's going, we'll see if it does it. I'll just click on here. Wow, it flooded the whole thing. I hadn't actually expected that. Um, so we're going to kind of give this thing a base rock material all over it. And then we can start painting some of the grass and dirt on. Actually, I'm going to want some rock on this too. So now I'm going to grab my grass brush or my grass texture. I'm going to come back over here. I'm going to clean up what happened here. Give this a minute. It's trying to figure out where all of this is supposed to go. So we're going to give it just a second while it figures all of that out. And wait to I'll adjust my brush sizes. So let's go ahead and just really quickly paint in a bunch of our grass texture. And now I'm going to grab my rock. I'm going to come in and I'm going to start painting this back in. So now that we've actually started to paint on the landscape, notice it's not disappearing as quickly and we're not getting any of those weird black spots like we were. We just have to finish painting those in. Paint that in real quick. So the longer you hold the mouse button down, the more it's going to flood. You can really lightly tap the mouse to kind of blend these together a little bit more. You can also do that with the tool strength here. I've got it set to 0.1 right now, which is very, very low tool strength. And what that does is, when I click and I just click once, it does this really light blending between the two, giving me a lot of control over the way this is going to turn out. And because we're doing three simple textures that aren't really landscape textures, our results aren't really going to be that great, but it's better than not having any material on here at all. I'm going to come in and let's just actually kind of really quickly paint some more of this out. We're going to do our best to work with the material we have and see how well we can how good we can make this look. Chances are, if you've got a good technical artist, your landscape material is going to look fantastic and you won't have to worry. It'll be a lot less work than what I'm going to do here right now. But to be fair, I feel more important that you get a little bit familiar with materials and how they work, and then we can get into the nuances of some of the more advanced things like material instancing, master materials, and creating some of the much more complex materials that Unreal is capable of. Landscape materials being one of those. So let's come over here and grab this rock again. I don't know why it is destroying the texture on that bit, but hopefully now we won't have to deal with that anymore. So yesterday I was sculpting this, and I was doing this for one specific reason, and that was for this demo. I actually wanted to have this ready to go for what I'm about to do. So I'm going to drop my brush down to about 256, and I want to just kind of come in here and make some rock show through on this. I grew up in Oregon, and there's a lot of places out in the woods like this where it's a path in between two rock faces that have been overgrown a little bit, and they've got grass and ferns and moss and whatnot growing on them, maybe some dirt coming out of them. So I'm going to start getting that set up here. I'm just going to kind of lightly go over this and get the base material down, and I'll start actually texturing, or I'll start blending all these together now. Give this a second while it compiles the shader. Alright, so let's kind of real lightly come through here with that gravel. Gonna add some of that over the top of this rock we have here. Just kind of blend all of this together a little bit. It's actually looking pretty good. Okay. Actually surprised at how good the normal map on that grass is looking. In older versions of Unreal, grass normal maps were really hard to make look right, and these are actually looking pretty good considering I didn't do anything extra to them. I just kind of did them as is. Um, this is going to be another one of those things that's a little bit like the like actually sculpting the landscape itself. It's going to take a little patience and a little finesse. There are tools for auto-generating your landscape materials, and some things like World Machine will. One of the things it can output are materials it'll output the textures. You still have to rig up the materials themselves, but there are ways to auto-generate these. Again, I like having a certain amount of control over the outcome of what I do, and this is not great, but with a little bit of work, this could look really fantastic. And this was just a few minutes of going back and forth over it. So let's kind of do the same thing up here and just paint some of this out. So mountains aren't all rock face. Let's turn our brush size up to about 1024. And I come up here and start blending some of this together a little bit better. I don't necessarily want to flood everything with the grassy color. I kind of like that my rock is showing through. Grass growing on rock is generally growing in very loose soil, very shallow soil. So often you can still see some of the details of the rock underneath, and the grass is a very light covering. For example, if you've ever seen pictures of the Scottish Highlands, you're already kind of familiar with this concept. So here, let's get that. I don't know what happened there. It flooded that at a value of 1. Not what I wanted, but it's easy to fix. So come back in and we'll just kind of do the same thing over here. For anyone who cares, you can do this with a Wacom tablet as well, and the pressure sensitivity works. For right now, I'm using my mouse. I find it a lot easier to just kind of tap the mouse button to get a real light coating, and holding it down to just flood a surface. For right now, I really just want the light coating though. I want it to be heavier in some areas than others, but I want to try and avoid letting it get to a value of 1 like it is right here all over the place. I don't want to cover up all this detail. I just want to try and blend it together a little bit. Once I'm done with this, I'll probably add some of the dirt material to a few areas also, for similar reasons, just more blending, kind of more variation in the material and the texture. So hopefully we can cut down on some of the thumbprinting and have a much nicer final product. Oh, and there's a few corrections from last night's video I need to go over. I mistakenly said that the brush size was in meters. It's not. It is centimeters. So whatever you have typed over here is the number of centimeters in size, or it's the brush radius in centimeters, not meters. So this is 1024 centimeters in radius, or 2048 in diameter. Um, and the other thing I said was that World Machine gave you less control. That's not necessarily true. I did a little bit of research, and apparently you can get really close to your desired results. However, you will generally have to come back in and still do some sculpting to make it actually workable. So, um, using something like World Machine is a completely viable way to make a landscape, and we'll probably go over that sometime this week also, because World Machine's kind of cool. I'm not going to be able to spend a lot of time on it, because it's a fairly it's a program with some complexity to it, but I'll show you some basics on how to generate a landscape out of it and how to generate some of the materials. Um, if you like Unreal's node-based system, you're going to like World Machine. World Machine uses a similar system where you're stringing nodes together to create the desired look that you want. Ideally, ideally you're going to have a lot, not a lot more, but you're going to have at least several more texture samples to work with in this, and it'll allow for more blending and that blending to look better. Because right now this still isn't looking very good. This is going to take some work to make these three textures work well together. And individually they're looking all right, but all together not so much. And some of that might be areas like this where they got a little bit more of they're a higher value than I want them to be. So we can we can use another one of our textures to blend some of that out just by lightly going over those areas. Um, and I feel like that makes it look a little bit more natural also. We get a little bit of the green from the grass showing through in the dirt, and same thing in the rock. And it's already starting to look better. Again, it's probably well, we might be able with a lot of work to get this to look okay, but based on the way this material's been set up, we're never going to get it to look great. So that's just kind of the general gist of landscape materials and how they work. Like I said, we're going to go over this in greater depth later. I kind of just wanted to get an introduction to the material editor um, and the landscape materials in general before we started worrying about a lot of the different parameters and nodes. And to give you an example of what I'm talking about, I can open up another one of the materials, and one of the fairly complex ones. This cobblestone rough actually is relatively complex. We've got quite a bit going on here in this material network. Um, as you can see, there's a lot of different blending going on here, and that's to give it this parallax that we see in it. Uh, this is a greater depth than you'll get out of a normal map, and it looks really, really fantastic in Engine. So that's this blending between the normal and then the grayscale texture, and it's taking all of these and blending these all together to get these results. And some of the landscape materials that you're going to wind up making or seeing or even using are going to have a level of complexity similar to this, sometimes more, sometimes less. Uh, One thing to watch out for, though, is these materials can get very expensive, and especially the more you do to them to make them look better and better. Um, I can. There's a demo that Epic did that was a outdoor. Um, I believe it's called Landscape Mountains, and I can open it up and show you the landscape material that they made for it. And the landscape material they made for it looks phenomenally good, but it's one of the more complex ones I was talking about earlier. Um, it's going to be more difficult to rig up. It's going to take considerably more time. And things like this, there's not necessarily a right or wrong way to do it, to set these materials up. It really is going to be based on the needs of whatever you're doing, how good you want it to look, how big your landscape is. Um, some of this thumbprinting you can get rid of just by putting meshes all over things. One of the other things I said last night that was not necessarily 100% correct had to do with actually sculpting landscape. So I'd like to address that real quick. I'm going to go to my sculpt tab. I'm going to grab my sculpt tool, and I'm just going to grab a chunk of something, and I'm going to sculpt it way up and get some of that gross stretching we were talking about yesterday. You can kind of see what's going on there. So yesterday I said not to do something like this because you wind up with results that, look like this. They really look gross. However, the one thing I left out was that if you do need to sculpt in cliff faces or something like that, or you need this big a change in elevation, you can use static meshes to block the rest of what somebody sees here. So let's see if there's anything in the get to that in a minute. Let's see if there's anything else in here that we can use. Props, maybe? No. We got some rocks. Generally, these are probably going to be too small, but generally you might have something big enough that that you would be able to use to kind of block these. Oh, that actually still looks pretty good scaled up. I hadn't really expected that to still look that good. But usually you would do something, similar to this, where you kind of take another mesh and you block these gross stretched out areas. And you've all seen this, whether you know it or not. A lot of the games that you've played use similar ways of dealing with things. Skyrim, if you open up their creation tool, almost all the dungeons, if you see a rock or something against a wall, it's just shoved in there. And in some cases, they're doing that not only for the ambience and to make things, kind of look really cool. It's also just because they needed to plug a hole that was existed in their world, and this is a good way to do it. It looks good. So, real quick, one last thing is we're going to look at their landscape mountains demo. And as you can see, this landscape material looks significantly better than the one that we have. And there's a reason for that, though. So you can see here we've got M underscore landscape master and then M underscore landscape instance. We'll talk more about master and instance materials later, but we are going to open up the master material. And I want to show you what's going on here. We've got some subsurface multiplying going on for the snow so that you get a little bit of subsurface scatter as light hits that texture. But here's where things get crazy. So these layer blending nodes here are called material functions, and essentially what these are doing is these are setting up slots that you can plug textures into in your instance materials. All of this is being set up this way so that all of this gets blended together. And thankfully, Epic is really, really good about commenting most of these materials that they've created. So if you're not sure what something does, you can look at it. Usually you'll have these nice comments in here. And if you ever want to comment your own materials that you're making, you highlight the material or you highlight what you want to comment. If we go back to our landscape demo and go in here, like if I wanted to highlight these guys and comment that these were my base color, I would drag select them with the left mouse button. And then while I'm still holding the left mouse button down, hit C on my keyboard. Oop, I created two comments in the wrong spot. So let's select these guys and hit C, and we get a comment just around this box. And so if we select the comment box, we can now type in here. So I can say base underscore color, and then I can grab these guys and hit C on my keyboard, and we can say normals. And for a material this small, this isn't really going to be a big deal. We don't really need to comment these. But while you're learning, I would recommend that you comment things as often as you can. Get used to it. Just make it part of your workflow. You're going to thank yourself for it 3 or 4 months down the line when you open something like this up again, and especially if it's very complex. You may not remember how to do it. You may not remember what you've done. And this is an easy way to remember those things. And not to mention the fact that if you have to hand this off to somebody else, like something like this, if somebody else opened it up, they should be able to pretty quickly figure out what it's like. But if we go back to that other demo I was showing, Um, if we were to go into something like this and there were no comments, it would be really difficult to tell what all of these things were. Um, and we'd like to avoid that. You don't want to waste anybody's time. You don't want to waste any of your own. And we want this to be quickly visually apparent what everything does. So that's all I have for today. There may be a stream tomorrow. If there is, it's going to be more landscape oriented things. But otherwise, have a great day and thanks for watching.